My mom answers letters to Santa for the post office. I found her stash. She steals the cash kids send and burns their letters. It all started because I was looking for the good angel, not the cheap plastic one we usually stick on top of the tree, the one with the tinsel hair that's perpetually shedding, but the old one, the one my grandma made out of porcelain and lace before she passed. Mom always said it was too delicate, too precious to risk, so it stayed packed away. But this year felt different. It felt like we needed something real, something with a bit of history to it. So I headed up to the attic, into the cold, dusty air that always smelled like old paper and forgotten things. The single light bulb hanging from a cord cast long, dancing shadows, making familiar shapes look like crouching monsters. I navigated the maze of stacked boxes, my breath pluming in front of me, until I found the corner dedicated to Christmas Past. Tucked behind a box of my dad's old yearbooks was a small, gray metal lockbox. It was dented and scratched, the kind of thing you'd find at a flea market. I'd never seen it before. Curiosity is a funny thing. It's like an itch you can't ignore. I ran my fingers over the cold metal, the little lock seeming more like a suggestion than a real security measure. I jiggled it, and when that didn't work, I started poking around the dusty shelf it was on. Tucked just behind a loose floorboard, I found a tiny, tarnished key on a loop of string. My heart started to beat a little faster. It felt like I was breaking a rule I didn't even know existed. With a click that sounded deafeningly loud in the silence, the box opened. The smell hit me first. It wasn't the musty scent of the attic. It was the faint, acrid smell of burnt paper. Inside, there was no porcelain angel. Instead, it was a chaotic nest of paper and money, dozens and dozens of envelopes, all addressed in the shaky, earnest handwriting of children. Santa Claus, North Pole. Some were decorated with crayon drawings of reindeer and stick figure families. Poking out of them and scattered loosely at the bottom of the box were crumpled dollar bills, fives, even a few tens. It was a messy, desperate-looking pile. For a second, I didn't understand. I thought maybe this was some kind of post office project, a collection for a charity. My mom was always doing things for the community, organizing bake sales, volunteering. It made sense. Then I picked one up. The paper was thin and crinkled, a sheet torn from a school notebook. The pencil lines were dark where the kid had pressed down hard. Dear Santa, my name is Sam. I am 7. I have been very good this year. I help my mom with my little sister Ellie. She doesn't have a warm coat for when we wait for the bus. All I want for Christmas is for her to have a pink one, a really puffy one. I am sending you all my money I saved to help. Love, Sam. Taped to the bottom of the letter with a piece of Scotch tape was a single worn-out dollar bill. My stomach twisted. I dropped the letter like it was hot, my fingers feeling grimy. I grabbed another and another. A girl asking for a new doll because her old one lost its leg. A boy asking for his dad to come home from his deployment. Each letter was a fragile little capsule of hope, and each one had a $1 or a $5 bill tucked inside like a secret. I sank back on my heels, the cold from the floorboards seeping through my jeans. The pieces started clicking together with a horrible, sickening finality. The way Mom always insisted on handling the Santa letters herself, calling it her special holiday duty. The nights I'd come home late and smell smoke, assuming she just had a fire going in the hearth, even though the house was already warm. She wasn't answering them. She wasn't sending them to some central office. She was pillaging them. She was taking these kids' lunch money, their saved-up allowances, their pure, unselfish wishes for a pink coat for their little sister, and she was burning the evidence. Downstairs, I could hear her humming. It was silent night. The sound, usually so comforting, so much a part of the fabric of my childhood Christmases, was suddenly monstrous. It was the soundtrack to her crime. I sat there, in the dusty dark of the attic, holding a 7-year-old's hope in my hands, and listened to my mother hum a Christmas carol, while the truth of what she was settled over me like a shroud. I carefully placed Sam's letter back in the box, closed the lid, and locked it. I slid it back into its hiding place, my movements stiff and robotic. As I walked down the attic stairs, the furnace in the basement kicked on with a low roar, and all I could think about was the sound of flames. The warmth of the house wrapped around me as I reached the bottom of the attic stairs, but it was a dead, useless heat. It couldn't touch the ice that was forming in my veins. The living room was just as I'd left it, bathed in the soft glow of the Christmas tree lights, each one a tiny, colorful lie. It was the same house I'd grown up in, the same worn rug, the same faint scent of pine and cinnamon, but it felt like a stranger's home now, a set for a play where I'd suddenly forgotten all my lines. My mom was sitting in her favorite armchair by the fireplace, the one with the floral pattern, worn smooth over the years. A halo of light from the lamp beside her caught the silver in her hair. She was knitting, the rhythmic click-clack of the needles, a sound so familiar it was practically part of my own heartbeat. She looked up as I entered, her face breaking into that easy, warm smile that had always been my safe harbor. "There you are, honey. Find what you were looking for?" Her voice was a soft melody, the same voice that had read me bedtime stories and soothed away nightmares. Now it was the woman who hummed Silent Night while she burned the hopes of children. I had to force my own voice to work. It came out sounding thin and reedy. "No, I couldn't find the angel." The lie tasted like ash in my mouth. "I guess it's really tucked away." She just nodded, her eyes already turning back to the complex pattern of her knitting. "Oh, honey, that old thing. It's probably for the best. It's so fragile." Her casual dismissal, the way she called my grandmother's last gift "that old thing," sent a fresh wave of cold fury through me. It was all just stuff to her. Fragile things were meant to be put away, or, apparently, disposed of. I sat on the couch opposite her, my body rigid. I watched her hands, the way her fingers moved with such practiced grace, weaving the yarn into a sweater for a cousin I barely knew. These were the same hands that had sorted through those letters, that had plucked out the crumpled dollar bills, the same hands that had struck the match. I tried to make it sense. My mind scrambled for a reason, any reason that wasn't pure, simple cruelty. Were we in trouble? Was there some secret debt I didn't know about? That's pension was small, and her part-time job at the post office was more for community than cash, or so I thought. Was this what desperation looked like? A quiet, smiling woman knitting by the fire while she committed 1,000 tiny thefts to keep our world from collapsing? For a wild, hopeful second, I almost believed it. It was a story I could understand, a crime I could almost forgive. She set her knitting aside and stood up, stretching with a soft groan. "I'm going to make some tea. Want some?" I just nodded, unable to speak. As she disappeared into the kitchen, the soft clatter of a kettle and mugs filling the silence, my eyes darted to her purse. It was sitting on the end table next to her chair, a worn leather bag, sagging and familiar. I'd never gone through her purse in my life. It was a sacred, private space, but the rules had changed. The world had changed in the last 20 minutes. My heart hammered against my ribs as I stood up, moving silently across the room. My hands were shaking. I felt like a thief, and the irony was so bitter it almost made me laugh. I unzipped the main compartment. The usual contents spilled out: a half-used tube of lipstick, a bundle of tissues, her keys, a wallet thick with loyalty cards, and receipts. A thick, crumpled wad of them. I pulled them out, my fingers fumbling. Grocery store, gas station, the pharmacy. All normal, all depressingly, frustratingly normal. There was no evidence of a secret life, no clue to some grand, tragic reason. And then I saw it. A smaller, glossy receipt from the Polished Nail, a salon in the next town over. The date was from yesterday. The service listed was gel manicure with holiday design. The total came to $45. $45. I could picture the letters in the box perfectly. A few tens, a handful of fives, and a sea of single, worn-out dollar bills. The money from a dozen kids, maybe more. The cost of a little girl's wish for a puffy pink coat for her sister, the price of a boy's prayer for his dad to come home. All of it tallied up to pay for tiny, glittering snowflakes to be painted on my mother's fingernails. I looked at her hands again in my mind's eye. The perfectly shaped nails, the glossy red polish. There was no tragic secret. There was no noble desperation. There was just this: small, ugly, and cheap. The humming from the kitchen started up again, another carol. The furnace in the basement was silent now, but I could still hear the flames. It wasn't a fire for warmth. It was a fire to get rid of the trash. I heard the clink of a spoon against ceramic, a final stir of tea, and my blood ran cold. I shoved the wad of receipts back into her purse, my fingers clumsy and slick with sweat. I zipped it shut just as she walked back into the living room, a cheerful steam arising from the 2 mugs in our hands. She was humming again. It was "Deck the Halls." My eyes immediately locked onto her fingers curled around the warm porcelain. The nails were perfect, of course. A deep, glossy crimson, and on each ring finger a tiny, exquisitely painted snowflake that probably sparkled under the right light. The light of a fire, maybe. $45. The price of a child's belief in magic, painted right there on her fingertips. She handed me a mug, her smile never faltering. "Here you go, sweetie. Peppermint, your favorite." I took it from her, careful not to let my fingers brush against hers. The warmth of the mug was a strange contrast to the chill that had taken root deep in my bones. I sat back down on the couch, my movements stiff. I felt like I was made of glass, and if she said the wrong thing or looked at me too closely, I would shatter into a million pieces. She settled back into her armchair, taking a delicate sip of her tea. "Oh, this is nice," she sighed. "It's so good to have you home. It just doesn't feel like Christmas until you're here." The words were a physical blow. Every cherished memory, every warm holiday sentiment she'd ever expressed was now suspect. Was it all a performance? Was I just another part of the cozy scenery she'd curated for herself, a prop in her perfect little Christmas play? I watched her over the rim of my mug, searching her face for any flicker of deceit, any crack in the facade. But there was nothing, just the placid, loving face of my mother. The silence stretched, filled only by the soft ticking of the mantel clock. I needed her to be a monster. I needed her to have a cruel glint in her eye or a sharpness to her voice. It would have been easier. But she was just Mom. She was talking about Mrs. Henderson's new inflatable snowman, how it was terribly tacky and blocked the view of her prize-winning rose bushes, even though they were dormant for the winter. I made a vague sound of agreement, the peppermint tea scalding my tongue. I was an observer in my own life, watching a scene unfold that I no longer understood. Every casual gesture she made seemed laden with sinister meaning. The way she adjusted the throw pillow behind her back wasn't for comfort. It was the self-satisfaction of a queen on her throne. The gentle steam rising from her tea wasn't just steam. It was a ghostly echo of the smoke from 100 burning letters. Just then, the sound at the garage door grinding open broke the spell. A few moments later, the back door opened and my dad came in, stamping the snow from his boots. "It's getting slick out there," he announced, his voice a familiar, gentle rumble. He kissed my mom on the cheek and then came over to ruffle my hair, a gesture he'd been doing since I was 5. "Hey, kiddo, how was the drive?" I managed a smile that felt like it was cracking my face. "It was fine, Dad." He looked tired. The lines around his eyes seemed deeper than I remembered. He hung his coat and sat on the arm of my mom's chair, and she leaned her head against his side. They looked so normal, so perfectly, painfully normal, and a new terrible thought wormed its way into my brain. Does he know? Is he part of this? I watched him, searching his face just as I had my mother's, but he just looked like a man happy to be home, sitting by the fire with his family. "Big day tomorrow, Carol. Your last big mail run before the holiday." My mother nodded, a little self-important smile playing on her lips. "I know, it's the final push. So many last-minute wishes to get to the North Pole." She looked at me, her eyes twinkling. It's my most important volunteer work of the year, making sure every child's voice gets heard. The hypocrisy was so blatant, so staggering, it almost choked me. I had to look away, focusing on the dancing lights of the Christmas tree, their reflections blurring in my vision. She was going back for more. Tomorrow. The final push. A new wave of letters, a final haul of crumpled dollar bills to fund what? Another manicure? A new scarf? The sheer pettiness of it all was what truly broke me. It wasn't a grand crime. It was a death by 1,000 tiny, greedy cuts. And in that moment, sitting in the warm glow of my childhood home, I knew I couldn't just sit here and watch it happen. I had to see it. I had to follow her. I had to know exactly what she did when she walked through the doors of that post office with a bag full of children's dreams. The rest of the evening passed in a surreal haze. We ate dinner, my mom's pot roast, a dish that used to be the very definition of comfort and home. Tonight, every bite tasted like ash. I watched them across the table, my parents, a unit. They talked about the weather, about my dad's work, about whether they should get a real tree this year or stick with the artificial one. It was a script they'd performed 1,000 times, and I was always a happy member of the cast. Now I felt like I was in the audience, watching a horror movie I couldn't turn off. My dad mentioned that his car was making a funny noise, a sort of rattling when he accelerated. "I'll take a look at it this weekend," he said. My mom just nodded, dabbing her mouth with a napkin. "Don't spend too much on it, honey. We've got to be a little careful with Christmas right around the corner." The comment landed like a stone in my stomach. Careful. I pushed a piece of carrot around my plate, my appetite completely gone. Was my dad's obliviousness an act? Or was he truly just a man worried about his car, completely unaware that his wife was funding her holiday cheer with stolen wishes? After dinner, I excused myself, claiming I was exhausted from the drive. I went up to my old room, the one with the faded, star-shaped glow-in-the-dark stickers still on the ceiling. It felt like a museum of a life that was no longer mine. I didn't sleep. I couldn't. I just lay there in the dark, listening to the familiar sounds of the house settling, the groan of the pipes, the whisper of the wind against the window pane. Around midnight, I heard my parents come up to bed, the soft murmur of their voices through the wall, the click of the lamp on my mom's nightstand, the final sigh as the house fell into true silence. It was a portrait of domestic peace, and it was all a lie. I stared at the ceiling, and the plan began to form in my mind, simple and terrifying. I couldn't take my car, she'd recognize it in a second. But my dad's car, the one with the rattle, he wouldn't be using it tomorrow. He always took the train into the city on Fridays. The keys were right on the little ceramic dish by the back door. I just had to get to them before she came downstairs. I must have dozed off because the next thing I knew, a pale gray light was filtering through my curtains. My phone said it was 5:45 a.m. My heart started hammering against my ribs. This was it. I slipped out of bed, pulling on a pair of jeans and a dark hoodie. Every creak of the floorboards under my feet sounded like a gunshot in the silent house. I held my breath as I passed my parents' bedroom door, which was slightly ajar. I could hear my dad's soft, rhythmic snores. I crept down the stairs, one step at a time, avoiding the third one from the bottom that always groaned. The keys were right where I knew they'd be, cold and heavy in my palm. I slipped them into my pocket and unlocked the back door as quietly as I could, the click of the deadbolt echoing in my ears. The cold air hit me like a slap in the face. I slipped out, closing the door behind me until I heard the latch catch. I was out. I was a thief in my own home. I hurried to my dad's car, parked on the street, and slid inside, the worn fabric of the seats smelling faintly of his after-shaven coffee. I slumped down, my head below the window line, and I waited. It felt like an eternity. The sky slowly brightened from gray to a watery, wintry blue. Finally, around 7:30, the front door opened. My mom emerged, bundled in her winter coat, a cheerful red scarf wrapped around her neck. In her hand, she carried a large canvas tote bag, the mail bag. It looked full, lumpy. She was humming. Of course she was humming. She walked to her car in the driveway, completely oblivious to me sitting just 30 feet away, watching her every move. She tossed the bag onto the passenger seat, started the engine, and backed out onto the street. My hands were slick with sweat as I turned the key in the ignition. The engine turned over with a low rumble, and the rattle my dad had mentioned was definitely there. I prayed it wasn't loud enough for her to notice. She drove away, heading toward town, and I pulled out from the curb, leaving 3 car lengths between us. I was following my own mother to the scene of her crime, my heart a frantic, terrified drum against my ribs, a shadow tailing the woman I used to think I knew. The rattle was louder than I'd thought, a metallic chatter that seemed to scream my presence to the entire sleepy town. Every time I eased off the brake at a stop sign, it would start up again, a frantic accompaniment to the frantic beating of my own heart. I hunched lower in the driver's seat, my knuckles white on the steering wheel, convinced that at any second she'd hear it, glance in her rearview mirror, and see the familiar silhouette of her husband's sedan. But she never did.
She just drove with a calm, unhurried confidence, signaling for her turns, stopping completely at the crosswalks. She was just a woman on her way to do some charity work. The thought was so absurd, so utterly disconnected from the reality I now knew, that a bubble of hysterical laughter tried to force its way up my throat. I swallowed it down, the taste bitter and acidic. We passed the grocery store where she'd taught me how to pick a ripe avocado, the small park where she'd pushed me on the swings, the library where she'd signed me up for my first library card. Each landmark was a ghost, a memory of a person who didn't exist anymore, or maybe never had. She pulled into the post office parking lot, taking a spot right near the front entrance. My stomach twisted. I couldn't follow her in there. She'd see me instantly. I kept driving, my eyes darting around, searching for a solution. I saw it, a block down, a small diner with a handful of cars parked in its lot, angled in a way that gave me a clear, if slightly distant view of the post office doors. I pulled in, killing the engine and cutting off the telltale rattle. The silence that followed was deafening. I watched her get out of her car. She adjusted her red scarf, hoisted the canvas tote bag over her shoulder, and walked toward the building with a brisk, purposeful stride. From this distance, she was just another citizen running an errand, a pillar of the community. The sheer, unadulterated gall of it was breathtaking. She was hiding in plain sight, her deception cloaked in the most mundane, respectable activities imaginable. She pushed open the heavy glass door and disappeared inside. And then I just sat there. The car began to get cold. My breath fogged up the inside of the windshield. 10 minutes passed. Then 20. What was I expecting to see? For her to come running out with fistfuls of cash? The whole operation, I was realizing, was probably far more subtle, far more insidious than that. She was inside, probably in some back room, being greeted by name by postal workers who thought she was a saint. They'd give her a cup of coffee, thank her for her service, and leave her alone with the bags of mail from all the surrounding towns. They'd leave her alone with all those letters, all those carefully printed names and smudged crayon drawings. The image of her, alone in a room, slitting open envelopes with a letter opener, her face illuminated by a bare fluorescent bulb, was so vivid it made me shiver. The warmth of the fire from last night felt a million miles away. This was the real her, the one who existed in cold, quiet rooms when no one was looking. The waiting was a special kind of torture. It gave my mind too much room to work, to spin out horrifying possibilities. Was my dad really oblivious, or was he just a better actor than she was? Were there whispered conversations at night not about bills and work, but about how many $1 bills she'd managed to skim that day? The foundation of my entire life felt like it was crumbling into sand, and I was just sitting here in a cold car watching it happen. I couldn't just sit here. I couldn't drive away and pretend I hadn't seen anything. That would make me a part of it, a silent accomplice. The initial plan, just to follow her, to confirm it, felt flimsy and cowardly now. I had to go inside. I had to see her. I didn't know what I would do, what I would say, but I knew I couldn't stay in this car a second longer.
My hand, trembling slightly, reached for the door handle. The click it made as I pushed it open sounded like a starting pistol. The air inside the post office was warm and smelled of stale paper and wet wool. A line of about 5 people snaked away from the counter, their faces bored and impatient. The low hum of the lights overhead mixed with the thud of a rubber stamp and the quiet murmur of conversations. It was aggressively, painfully normal. I scanned the public area, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. She wasn't behind the counter. She wasn't in the line.
For a terrifying second, I thought I'd missed her, that she'd already gone. I felt a strange mix of relief and disappointment. I took a step back toward the door, ready to retreat, to chalk this all up to a paranoid fantasy. But then I saw her. She wasn't in the public space at all. She was standing over by a side counter, chatting with a uniformed postal worker, a man with a gray mustache and a kind smile. She was laughing at something he'd said, one hand resting on the canvas bag that now sat on the counter between them. She looked so comfortable, so at home. This was her territory. The man chuckled and then nodded toward a door behind the main counter, the kind with a small wired glass window and a sign that read, "Employees Only." He gestured for her to go ahead. She smiled her thanks, a bright, genuine-looking smile that made my stomach clench, and hefted the bag. She walked past the end of the counter, pushed the door open, and disappeared behind it. The door swung shut with a soft, definitive whoosh, cutting off my view. She was in. She was back there, in the heart of the machine, with a bag full of secrets and stolen money. I just stood there, frozen in the middle of the post office, staring at that plain, unremarkable door. It was a simple, beige door, but it might as well have been the entrance to a vault or a tomb. And the truth I was so desperate to find was locked away on the other side. For a few seconds, my feet were bolted to the floor. The world shrunk until it was just me and that beige door, a flimsy barrier separating my life before and my life after. The mundane sounds of the post office, the crinkle of a priority mail envelope, the quiet puff of the woman in line, the rhythmic thump, thump of the stamp, all faded into a dull roar. My mom was in there. She was on the other side of that door with that canvas bag, doing something so monstrously wrong that my mind couldn't fully process it. She was dismantling the faith of children, one letter at a time, and she had just been waved through with a friendly smile. The casualness of it was what truly broke me. This wasn't a clandestine meeting in a dark alley. This was a routine. This was normal. A man behind me cleared his throat, a polite but firm signal that I was in the way. The sound snapped me back to reality. I couldn't just stand here like a statue. I looked like a lost kid, or worse, someone who was up to no good. I had to blend in. I had to have a reason for being here. My eyes darted around and landed on the line for the counter. It was the only logical thing to do. I shuffled over and took my place at the back, my hands shoved deep into my pockets, my shoulders hunched. I kept my eyes down, focused on the scuffed linoleum floor, trying to regulate my breathing. Inhale, exhale. Just be a normal person in a post office. But my heart was a trapped bird beating its wings frantically against my ribs. With every person who moved forward, I was getting closer to the counter, closer to the man with the mustache, the friendly gatekeeper to my mother's secret world. The line crawled. I could feel the seconds stretching into minutes. My mind was a whirlwind. What was she doing in there right now? Was she in an office? A break room? Was she carefully sorting the letters, separating the ones with suspicious lumps from the flat ones? The image of her last night, her face lit by the fire, her expression serene as she fed those letters to the flames, was seared in my brain. Now I pictured her under the harsh fluorescent lights of a government building, her actions just as destructive, but stripped of all ceremony. It was just work, a cold, calculated process. The man with the mustache laughed again, sharing a joke with the customer at the counter. How could he not know? How could everyone be so blind? Or was I the one who was crazy?
Was this all some horrible, elaborate misunderstanding? But I had seen the letters. I had seen the cash. I had smelled the smoke. Then it was my turn. I stepped up to the counter, my throat dry. The man with the mustache smiled at me. It was a genuine, crinkle-eyed smile. "What can I do for you, son?" he asked, his voice a friendly baritone. Up close, I could see his name tag, Frank. I opened my mouth, but no words came out. I hadn't thought this far ahead. What did I need? What do people do at a post office? My mind was a complete blank. I stammered, I need to mail a letter. It was the stupidest, most obvious thing I could have said. "All righty," Frank said, his smile unwavering. "Just one?" I nodded, my head feeling heavy. I didn't have a letter. My hands were empty. A fresh wave of panic washed over me. Frank's eyes flickered from my face to my empty hands and then back again. A flicker of confusion crossed his face, but then it was replaced by a look of dawning recognition. "Hey, wait a minute," he said, leaning forward slightly. "You're Carol's boy, aren't you? David's son." My blood ran cold. He knew me. Of course he knew me. "Yeah," I managed to croak out. His smile widened. "I thought so. You've got your dad's eyes. Your mom just headed back. She's a saint, that woman, a real saint. The work she does with those Santa letters brightens up the whole station this time of year." He shook his head in admiration. A real pillar of the community. He was looking at me, expecting a response, expecting me to smile and agree, to be proud. I just nodded, a jerky, puppet-like motion. I felt like a fraud, complicit in the very lie he was praising. The weight of his words, of his misplaced trust, was crushing. "Yeah," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "She's something." I fumbled in my pocket for $1, my hand shaking. Can I just get a book of stamps?" It was the only thing I could think of. He sold me the stamps, wished me a Merry Christmas, and then called, "Next!" I stumbled away from the counter, my mission a complete failure. I hadn't learned anything. I had only been drawn deeper into the web of her deception. I felt sick. I was heading for the exit, my head down, when the employees-only door swung open. A woman in a postal uniform came out carrying a stack of plastic bins. For a split second, the door hung open, and I had a clear, unobstructed view into the room beyond. It was a large, cluttered sorting room filled with rolling carts and shelves stacked high with mail. And in the corner, at a small metal desk, sat my mother. She had her back to the door, her canvas tote was on the floor beside her, a large, overflowing mail sack was on the desk, and she was pulling letters from it, one by one. She wasn't reading them. She was holding each one up to the light of the desk lamp, her head tilted. She was candling them, like you would an egg, looking for shadows, looking for cash. She'd place one on a small pile to her left and another on a much larger pile to her right. Then she picked one from the small pile, slid it open with an efficiency that spoke of long practice, and her hand dipped inside. The door swung shut and the image was gone, but it was burned onto the back of my eyelids. It was real. It was all real. I didn't move. I couldn't. My legs were locked. My lungs were concrete. The door was just a beige door again, but the image it had revealed was seared onto the inside of my skull, a permanent afterimage burned by a flash of terrible light. The sorting room, the desk lamp, my mother's profile, her brow furrowed in concentration, not malice. That was the worst part. She looked like she was balancing a checkbook or mending a seam. It was methodical. It was practiced. It was a job. The casual efficiency of her movements, the way she slipped the envelope and plucked out its contents without a flicker of emotion, was more chilling than any maniacal laughter or villainous monologue could ever be. This wasn't a crime of passion, it was a system, a cold, quiet, soul-crushing assembly line where hope was the raw material and ash was the byproduct. The sounds of the post office rushed back in, loud and jarring. Frank called out, "Next!" again, his voice painfully cheerful. I could feel his eyes on my back. I could feel everyone's eyes on me. I had to get out. I turned, my movements stiff and robotic, and walked toward the glass doors. Each step was a monumental effort. The floor felt sticky, like it was trying to hold me there, to make me a permanent witness. I pushed the door open and stumbled out into the biting December air. The cold was a shock, a slap in the face that did nothing to clear my head. The world outside was just as it had been minutes before. Cars driving past, a woman walking her dog, gray skies, threatening snow, but it all felt like a movie set, a fake, paper-thin reality stretched over the horrifying truth I now carried. My world had been reduced to a single, ugly fact. My mother, the woman Frank called a saint, was a thief who preyed on children. The walk home was a blur. I don't remember my feet hitting the pavement or the route I took. My mind was stuck on a loop, replaying those few seconds of footage. Her holding the envelope to the light, the faint shadow of a folded bill inside, the quick sort into two piles, the worthless and the worthwhile. The larger pile, the one filled with simple, heartfelt wishes and crayon drawings, was destined for the fireplace. The smaller pile was her profit. The thought made bile rise in my throat. All this time I'd been trying to understand why. Was it desperation? Was she in some kind of trouble? But the look on her face hadn't been one of desperation. It was a look of simple, unadorned industry. She was just going to work. The banality of it was what truly broke me. Frank's words echoed in my head, a cruel counterpoint to the images. "You've got your dad's eyes." The comparison felt like a curse. My dad, he was the pragmatic one, the one who always said things like, "There's no such thing as a free lunch," and "People look out for number one." I'd always seen it as a kind of gruff, world-weary wisdom, a way of preparing me for life's disappointments. Now I saw it through a different lens. Was his pragmatism just a different shade of my mother's cynicism? Did he know? The question hit me with the force of a physical blow, knocking the wind out of me. I stopped in the middle of the sidewalk, leaning against a frozen parking meter to steady myself. Could he have known about this? Could he have been a part of it? The foundation of my entire life, of every memory I had, seemed to crack and splinter. My father's quiet integrity, my mother's gentle kindness, it was all a lie, a carefully constructed facade to hide the rotten core. When I finally reached my house, it looked alien. It wasn't a home, it was a headquarters. The living room fireplace was an incinerator. Her bedroom closet was a vault. I let myself in, the silence of the empty house pressing in on me. I walked into the living room and stood before the hearth. The bricks were cold and black. I could almost smell the ghosts of those letters, the faint, lingering scent of burnt paper and melted crowns. I thought of the little girl, Sarah, asking for a coat for her brother. My mother probably held that letter up to the lamp, seen no shadow, and tossed it onto the big pile, the pile for the fire. A wave of anger so pure and hot that it nearly choked me washed away the shock and the nausea. This wasn't just about money. It was about something so much bigger. It was about kicking people when they were down, about taking the smallest, most fragile flicker of hope in a person's heart and deliberately, methodically snuffing it out. I couldn't just confront her. I saw that now. She would deny it. She would lie. She would twist it all around until I was the crazy one, the ungrateful son snooping through her things and making wild accusations. Frank's voice proved how good her cover was, a real pillar of the community. No one would believe me. I needed more than the ashes in the fireplace or the cash in her closet. I needed the letters themselves. I needed the evidence before it was destroyed. I knew her routine now. She went to the post office, did her sorting, and brought the profitable letters, and the ones for disposal, home in that canvas bag. She wouldn't burn them until late, after she thought I was asleep. That was my window. I wasn't going to let another single letter turn to ash. I wouldn't be a passive observer anymore. I was going to wait for her, and I was going to take back what she stole. I found my spot in the dark recess of the hallway, the one spot where the floorboards didn't creak, and I waited. The house was a tomb, amplifying every tiny sound, the hum of the refrigerator, the groan of the pipes, the frantic, rabbit-like thumping of my own heart against my ribs. Time stretched and warped. Every minute felt like an hour. I was a hunter in my own home, and my prey was my mother. The anger I'd felt earlier had cooled, hardening into something dense and heavy in my gut. It wasn't about shouting anymore. It was about seeing. I needed to see it one last time to confirm that the monster I'd glimpsed through the sorting room door was the same woman who lived in this house. The key turned in the lock, a loud metallic scrape that sent a jolt through my entire body. The front door opened, letting in a slice of the cold night air, and then she was inside. She moved with the weary familiarity of someone at the end of a long day. She dropped her keys in the ceramic bowl on the entryway table, hung her coat in the closet, and then she set the canvas mail sack on the dining room table. It landed with a soft, heavy thud. It was the only thing in the room that mattered. She didn't turn on the main lights, just a small lamp that cast long, dancing shadows. For a moment, she just stood there, her back to me, looking at the bag. And in that moment, she just looked like my mom. Tired, maybe a little sad. Then her shoulders straightened, and she unbuckled the strap. She was all business again. She pulled out the 2 stacks of letters, the small one and the large one, and set them next to each other. Then she walked to the fireplace. She knelt, opened the flue, and crumpled up a piece of newspaper. She was preparing the altar. That's when I stepped out of the shadows. "Don't," I said. My voice was a low croak, a stranger's voice in my own throat. She froze, her hand hovering over the kindling. She didn't yelp or jump. She just slowly turned her head, her face unreadable in the dim light. "What are you doing up?" she asked, her tone laced with a mild parental annoyance, as if I'd caught her sneaking cookies before dinner. "I know what you do," I said, my voice gaining a little strength. I pointed a trembling finger at the stacks of letters on the table. "I know where the money comes from. I know what you do with the rest of them." I expected a denial. I expected tears, excuses, a desperate lie. I got none of it. She simply stood up, wiping a bit of soot from her fingers onto her pants. She looked at the letters, then back at me, and a sigh escaped her lips. It wasn't a sigh of guilt. It was a sigh of inconvenience. "So you know," she said, as if I'd discovered she was regifting a fruitcake. The sheer lack of drama was more disorienting than any confession. "Why?" I finally managed to ask, the word feeling small and useless. She walked over to the table and picked up a letter from the large pile, the burn pile. "Because Santa isn't real," she said, her voice flat and cold. "The world isn't a magical place where your wishes come true just because you're a good little boy or girl. It's hard. It's unfair, and the sooner they learn that, the better off they'll be." She tossed the letter back onto the pile. "I'm just speeding up the lesson, and if I can take a little tuition fee for the trouble, then so be it. It pays the bills your father's integrity never could." The mention of my dad was a gut punch. "He knew?" I whispered. "Did Dad know about this?" She gave a short, bitter laugh. "No. Honey, he invented the curriculum. He saw all those letters pile up years ago when he was a temp. He called it the world's saddest untapped resource. He was always the pragmatic one. And there it was, the final support beam of my life giving way, turning to dust. It wasn't just her, it was them. The entire foundation was a lie. My parents, my heroes, the 2 people who were supposed to be the moral compass of my world, were just a pair of petty grifters stealing from children. I looked at her face, searching for a flicker of remorse, a hint of shame. There was nothing, just the wearied, hardened expression of someone who believed they were a realist in a world of fools. In that moment, I didn't feel anger anymore. I felt nothing. A vast, hollow emptiness where my childhood used to be. I walked past her to the table. I picked up the small stack of letters, the ones with the cash inside. I tucked them into my jacket. Then I gathered up the big pile, the hundreds of letters filled with crayon drawings and desperate, hopeful wishes. I held the huge, clumsy stack in my arms, pressing them against my chest. My mother watched me, her arms crossed. "What do you think you're doing?" she asked, her voice dangerously quiet. "You're going to ruin this family." I looked at her, at the cold fireplace, at the comfortable home built on incinerated hope. "What family?" I said. I turned and walked out the front door, leaving it wide open behind me. I didn't run, I just walked, out into the cold and the dark, carrying the weight of all those stolen wishes. I still have them. I have the money, too. And every day, I have to decide what to do with it all. When you discover the people you love are the villains, are you supposed to expose them, or are you supposed to become the hero they never were? Let us know in the comments.
Don't forget to like and subscribe. I post new stories every day.